there. Welcome to Buckeye Bigfoot. Tonight's story reminds us that we should maybe pay a bit more attention to the messages we're given while we're out in the woods, and that not all of those messages are loud or even spoken. Sometimes those messages come to us in deafeningly loud silences. And when you get a message like that, you best pack your meat and get out of there before darkness falls completely. So go on. Clip on your headlamp, pack your saddlebags, grab your snackage, because we're ready for tonight's journey to go down into Sasquatch Valley. And hey, if you must talk while we're on the trail, please keep your voice low. We need to be listening for those messages. You ready? Let's go. You can use my first name. It's David. I grew up in an old rural place where the corn meets the hardwoods, and the creek still remembers how to properly flood every spring. I've hunted that same slice of my county since I could hold on and ride a tailgate all by myself, though I know that's not allowed for children these days. Nearby was an old quarry with a 2-track that skirted it, and the ridge up there made up one side of the place, and that led out to woods full of critters. I'm not going to name the place because the quarry hasn't been worked in decades, but there are folks around here that still run their dogs, and they hang stands up there on that ridge and all down the other side to the creek. And I don't want anybody tromping in there with plans to be a hero and some big YouTube star being on their brain. I want instead to talk about the night that Bigfoot pushed us out. And he all but asked us to leave, told us to get out of his woods. We were respectful, and so was he, I guess you could say. But all of you out there need to know to listen to those silent sounds when they happen. This is my story. It was 2008. It was the second week of gun season, a Thursday that ran short on daylight long before we were done. The sky was pewter all afternoon, the kind of autumn color that never really quite commits to rain, but threatens to all day. Wind had a lazy drift out of the west. Thermals were out there falling early, which matters where the holler goes all the way down to the creek, and it carries with it every mistake you might make right to a whitetail's nose. I was hunting with my friend Trey. He's the sort that carries way too much rope and a first aid kit big enough to treat an entire church picnic, and I love him for it. Trey is definitely the guy you want to go into the woods with. We park at the pull-off by the old culvert. We hump up the ridge, and we slide into our little routine that we've done up there probably hundreds of times in our life. He took the inside edge of that oak flat above the shale cut. I slipped along the bench that leads to a saddle that deer use like a highway. About 4 o'clock, I heard a single dry leaf crack in the way. You know it's not some squirrel. I kept a watch, and there they came. A tight little procession that walked right through. Yearling, doe, then a buck with a frame nice and wide and sturdy. He wasn't a monarch, but he was clean and 4 past the ears. I don't shoot numbers. I shoot meat with manners, and he had them. He stopped quartering away at about 40 paces, and when the crosshairs settled into that perfect crease, I pressed the trigger so easy it felt like the shot happened all by itself. He mule-kicked, turned downhill, and vanished into the brush. I listened. You always listen after. I heard the crash, then the sliding thump of a body hitting the banks down by the creek bottom. Trey texted a single word to me. Boom? I texted back. Down. I eased down to the hit spot, and I marked the first blood. Frothy pink. Not a paint bucket, but plenty enough. We took it slow following the blood. I've lost deer before by being way too cocky and going way too fast. The trail stayed good, and then it got even better. and we found him tucked up tight against an old tree down on one side of the creek. His tongue was out, and his eyes, they'd already gone to that somewhere else place. We said a little thank you to the spirit that had left the deer, and then we said a thank you to the spirit that gave us this deer for our tables, and we meant every word of it. We tagged it, then took our quick picture, and quickly set to work. If you don't dress a deer where it falls, you don't drag far. But the bottom there, it runs to all kinds of muddy muck if you get off the top gravel. And the creek, it throws a lot of that muddy muck all over the place. We decided to quarter it and pack out instead of dragging the whole thing. Less mess and less cussing on our part. We had headlamps and knives that had seen their fair share of deer. I split him open careful to keep the tenderloins clean, then handed Trey the heart for his wife. She fries it up in a cast iron skillet that's turned blacker than midnight. She does it for their dogs. They absolutely love it. Then we rolled the hide back from the hams. Coyotes yipped a county over, not close enough to worry about. A nosy owl kept a watch over us from a nearby tree. We heard his hoots a few times. Otherwise, it was just us and the sound of our knives working on a hunt that had gone well and had been done right. That's when the walking started. You can feel a walk before your ears know to call it a walk, especially in leaf litter with a little bit of frost still hiding down in the low spots under the leaves. This wasn't squirrel multiple choice or a deer's careful place and freeze kind of walking steps. It had weight. It had heft. It had rhythm. Step, step, step. It wasn't hiding or trying to be sneaky. Trey's head immediately lifted up. Mine did too. We both turned, looking toward the walking sound. My headlamp wasn't on yet. We still had enough of last light. You know, the purple kind that gives the woods a hazy look the farther you look into them. What we didn't have was any eye shine. You get used to catching that nickel flash of a deer eye or the green coin of a coon in your periphery just at twilight. But we had nothing. There was just gray on the tree trunks standing still. Deer? Trey mouthed at me. I shook my head. Nah. Deer put their feet down like they're testing if a pane of glass can bear the weight. This sounded like a man that didn't care if the floor squeaked under his feet. We waited a minute, maybe. Then we went back to work, because we need to get that packed out of there before full dark if we could. But I kept the revolver on my belt, right where my palm could find it from memory, and Trey set the game bag a little nearer than he needed to. The steps moved with a slow and deliberate patience that raised my hackles about halfway. They came again, angling off to our left, then slow-tracked behind and downwind where the creek had an elbow bend. You could follow the sound with your eyes, but there was nothing else but sound to follow. Strangest thing, and I thought so at the time, but I kept working. A smell came with that sound. Musky, earthy. I really don't have anything to compare it with, though I felt sure it was some kind of an animal scent. It hit, and it made my mouth fill up involuntarily with spit, like it thought it could clean out the scent from my mouth and nostrils if I could just spit. I did not spit. "You got that headlamp handy?" Trey asked, calm and steady. "Yep," I said. "Maybe don't turn it on," he said. "Wasn't going to," I replied, and I wasn't. We finished the hams. I slid the quarters into bags, tied them off, and set them on the packed tarp. The back straps went in a separate sack. When I reached for the tenderloins, the steps stopped. Silence doesn't sound like anything until it's there, and then it's the loudest thing you've ever heard. I listened so hard to that silence, I couldn't hear anything else. Something shifted a branch, low, like a sapling being shouldered aside when you walk past. It was a soft and quick sound, but it was distinct. Then the walking started again, circling, but close to us, pacing the same circle around us, always just outside of where we could see between the trees, which was getting less and less farther as the light faded. "Bear?" Trey asked. "Maybe," I said. I didn't have the feeling of it being a bear, but I didn't have another answer of what it could be. "Let's just finish up, huh?" I said to Trey. He nodded. We finished up quick and neat. I cinched my pack. Trey cinched his. We left the gut pile as neatly as we could. We cleaned the cavity and set the lungs off to the side for the coyotes. Rib meat had been scraped up tidy. There's a right way and a wrong way to leave a place, and I wanted to be on the right side of whoever or whatever else was using that creek bottom. We strung up the other meat parts in bags about 20 feet up in the tree, maybe 150 feet away from where the gut pile and other discard laid. We would come back for the meat in the morning. We just couldn't carry it all tonight. I thought whatever it was would stay behind and surely go for the gut pile. Most animals would. But no, it followed us up and out of that creek bottom. The trail out of there is an old logging road that's cut into the side of the ridge. Then it steepens to a two-track that turns to red clay once you crest. That same two-track goes the other way down into the quarry if you go that way, but that's not where we were going. We didn't talk too much on the way out. We mostly listened. We stepped carefully, listening to our steps in the silence. And we heard something else under our own footfalls, steps that just kept pace off to our right, maybe 10 or 15 yards in, sometimes 20. And those footfalls were never gaining on us, never dropping back either. I've had coyotes ghost me like that, curious as kids. This wasn't that. This was more like a pushing escort, kind of the way like if you'd been too rowdy at the bar and security makes sure you leave the place. At the first switchback where the grade swings and you can look down through the mostly leafless trees to the creek bottom, Trey stopped. I did too, because we've done this enough that we moved together in a double act. If he stops, I stop, and vice versa. Trey slipped his pack off, set it down quiet, then cupped his hands to his mouth like he was warming them. Then he let out a loud whistle. I was surprised when he did that because we were together looking at one another. This is the whistle that we use to signal each other over distance or to find each other in the dark when we're all caught up in thick woods. One quick whistle, and it's short, followed by a very long whistle that scales up a note. No one could mistake that for a bird. Trey did that, and I looked over at him, about to ask him why he did that, when almost the exact same whistle came back to us from the trees, over where the steps were. It wasn't perfect. It was a beat too long on the first part, and the notes weren't exact. But it was close enough that if I'd heard it out there alone, I would have thought it was Trey on a day that maybe he had a cold or he was stuffed up or something. Close enough, I would have believed it, except I was staring at Trey. Me and Trey were looking right at each other, with just enough light left that we could still see. We knew we hadn't made that whistle. Now, we weren't the kind to do macho stuff or crack a bunch of jokes. Instead, we just gave each other a little look like, you know what, let's be done with this place tonight. Trey reshouldered his pack. "Let's make for the road," he said, voice just above a whisper. I nodded. We made the road in good time. Near the top of that ridge, there's a place where runoff cuts a shallow trench across the clay and the gravel. As we stepped over, a rock about the size of a baby's fist pinged off the culvert and skittered between us. That rock did not fall. It was thrown. Not like someone was angry. It was more like a kid just bored and throwing rocks. There was no force to it. "You heard that, right?" Trey asked. "Yep," I said. We both had that same look and we understood. Time to move. We didn't break into a run. You want to fall on your face and break a collarbone? You run under a pack on slick clay at night. Our steps were firm and sure, but they were a bit quicker than they were before. The steps down in the trees stayed level with us the whole time. Twice more, small stones ticked the road behind us, each one just off to the side, like the thrower was herding us between the rocks and wherever it wanted us to go. When we topped out on the 2-track, the world around us changed. It was now open. Sky above the tree line was still glowing a deep purple and orange from the sinking sun, colors that we had lost way down in the bottoms where it couldn't reach. Down below on the other side, we saw the white and red of Trey's truck where we'd left it by the old culvert. I could only see my truck behind it because mine had the big Lance cab-over camper shell fitted onto it, the white of which was easy to see because it stuck up higher than Trey's truck. But the sight of both of them was fading in the dim and darkening hazy light. We went down the 2-track till we found our cut down the side toward the truck. We got to the truck, and I suddenly felt safe, like we were kids out there playing a game at night, and this was home base, and no one could touch us. Those were the rules. I think we both felt that kind of relief. We slid the quarters into coolers, our hands shaking in that after-scared way that makes you fumble with clips and lids. Trey shut the hard tonneau cover over the coolers in the back of his pickup truck and locked it. We looked at each other and I said, "You want to go back for the rest tonight?" Trey hesitated just a second, then he said, "Nah, we'll get it in the morning." I don't mind saying to you that I was relieved when he said that. We both slept in my camper shell as we usually did, and it was parked right next to his truck, so if anything messed with the tonneau or the coolers, we'd hear it. But nothing did. I hardly slept that night, though. Every time I shut my eyes, I would hear that offbeat whistle and those measured steps that didn't care if we heard them. In the gray, just before dawn, I got up and I made coffee for us both. Normally, in the mornings, we chat a lot about what we've got to do that morning, and we just chat in general over coffee. But not that morning. We didn't talk much. Truth was, neither of us wanted to go back there, meat or no meat. I know that now, but I didn't know it at the time. Neither of us wanted to voice that to the other. We sipped our coffee and got ready to go back where we did not want to go. Mist lay on the ridge low and heavy that morning. It smelled like fresh rain, but there hadn't been a drop that fell overnight. We geared up and silently made our way back to the 2 tracks on the ridge, then down the switchbacks that we had walked the night before. As we did, I was looking, and I saw that no other marks had been put onto that clay since ours the night before. When we came to where the first rock had been thrown behind us, we got a surprise. We saw a rock cairn of several rocks on the side of the 2-track, not where anyone would have left a print. They could have stood off to the side and done it. The rocks there were smooth, and they were neatly stacked. These were not the jagged rocks from the quarry. I looked over at Trey, and he looked at me and just shook his head like, "Man, don't ask me. Just don't ask me, 'cause I don't know." We kept walking, but the whole time I'm wanting to walk the other way. I didn't care enough about the rest of the meat to really go back there. At the bottom, the discard from the deer lay just as we had left it. Neat, cavity open and clean, everything done respectfully. What was not like we had left it was the ground to the right where the gut pile should have been. It wasn't spread or torn around or coyote picked through. It was just gone, every last bit of it. Instead, there was a layer of leaves over the area in a conspicuous circle. I moved some with my boot. Underneath was a circle of blood from the gut pile that had been there. This blood area had been deliberately covered. I'd never seen anything like it. Coyotes don't do that, Trey said, his voice low. Nope, I said. You think it was kids? He asked. I let the silence answer. I shook my head no. There were no boot tracks, no cigarette butts, no beer bottles or cans. There was no sloppiness in the area to say a bunch of rowdy teens had been up there, or anyone else at all. Whoever or whatever did it left us no trace that we could see. We took note, then headed to our bags up in the trees. Thankfully, they hadn't been touched. We got them down quickly, and we made for tracks out of there. Our walk out was quiet. No steps paralleled us that morning. No rocks pinged behind us. At the switchback, the little stone stack that had been off to the side of the track gave us another surprise. It was larger. Someone had added to it while we went down to get our meat. I looked at Trey and started to ask, am I wrong or... But Trey cut me dead. No, you're not wrong. It's been added to. It's got more rocks. We looked at each other wide-eyed. By now, my hackles were fully raised. I didn't know what was going on, but my head started telling me stories that I'd heard. Things I'd heard all my life about things that lived in those woods and up in the hills. I didn't want to hear it. I just wanted out of there. We double-timed it back to the trucks, just one step short of being a full jog. And that was tough with the weight of the meat, but we knew better than to run. Back at the trucks, we iced the meat down in the coolers with ice that was becoming more water than ice by that point. We shut the tonneau cover quickly. I made us another quick cup of coffee before we went. We leaned up against Trey's truck and looked at the 2-track and up to the ridge. We were quiet. Trey and I had known each other since grade school, so we didn't have to do a lot of chatter at times if we didn't want to. But we were both thinking about it, and we both knew the other was thinking about it. Finally, Trey broke the silence. What do you think is going on, man? I thought for a second. I had a lot of thoughts on it, but I was going to be very careful about which ones I spoke out loud. Finally, I said, well, I felt like something was pushing us to get out of that area. Trey was looking at me steadily. All he said was, by what? Well, I said, by whatever knows that bottom better than we do, I guess. That was just the best I could say. By that morning, I really did have thoughts that it was probably a Bigfoot. That kept going through my head all night, especially the rock throwing and then finding the stacked stones. I knew those were indicative of folklore I'd heard of Bigfoot. I just didn't want to say it out loud that morning. Not that I was afraid or what I was afraid Trey would think. I just had difficulty with it. I don't know why. But that's okay. Because as always, Trey did the thing I couldn't do. He said it. Well, man, my 2 cents, we ran up against a Bigfoot out there. He said it quiet, and he didn't look at me when he said that. He just kept sipping his coffee. But I knew Trey, and I knew that he put all of his cards out on the table with that one sentence. He was good for doing that. I nodded quickly, yes, sure that he could see it, even though he wasn't looking directly at me. Well, I said, truth be told, my thoughts had been running that way since last night. This wasn't some person out there, and it sure wasn't any animal I know of. I still can't swear that it was a Bigfoot, but that's how my thoughts are running, yes. Trey said no more. We just sipped our coffees and didn't speak. We didn't tell anybody in town about this, except for my dad. He listened the way a man standing on his porch listens, a little sideways, and he had his hands in his pockets, and he was kind of quiet till I was done. Then he looked at me and he said, "Hey, I always told you not to drag through the dark down there, now didn't I?" I said, "Yes, sir, you did, and we didn't." Then he said, I know, but you still took meat out when it was getting dark. I told you don't ever do that. And don't ever do that again. Ain't worth it, my son. I nodded at him, and I promised I wouldn't. I went home thinking how my dad didn't tell me I was crazy or that there isn't any such thing, because we spoke the word Bigfoot. Before I left, I asked if he'd ever seen one out there. I wondered because he was so quick to agree that it was probably a Bigfoot. My dad looked at me for a few long seconds, and then all he said was, maybe. Then he shut the conversation down. I knew I would get the story from him someday, just not that day. And I did get that story, but this isn't about that. Maybe some other day, if I have the heart, I'll tell it as best as I can remember what he told me. He's now left this earth, but his story stays with me. A week later, I walked that same ridge alone at noon. I just had to. There's nothing so foolish or stubborn as me. And I have a lot more of that stubborn than I do foolish, I guess, though some would argue. On those muddy banks by the creek where you usually see all the tracks from all the animals coming down to drink, there were 2 marks that I still won't admit to really seeing, probably not even under oath in court. I keep them close and quiet to me. Those were very wide prints. Now, they weren't real pretty and they weren't real crisp, but they were big. I've seen bear overstep, and this was not it. They went from the bank up through the brush and the trees. I followed them. They went right to where all of our deer discard had been the week before. But the prints I was following were very recent, fresh within the last 24 hours, I was sure. Like it had kept going back there, looking for seconds and thirds, or maybe sixths and sevenths, I don't even know how many, after a whole week, but it had kept going back looking for food, I was sure. The prints were clear, and they circled the area, and all of it had been trampled heavily and overstepped 100 times, but I still knew those were not bear claw prints. And the area kept that bad smell there, too. Yes, I smelled the rotting blood soaked into the ground, and there were bits of rotting carcass here and there. But that musky, earthy animal scent laid over everything. It was very strong. I thought carefully before using the word Bigfoot to my dad, and I didn't want to say it first to Trey because, well, television and the internet have made the name kind of slippery, slimy, like some kind of joke. But it isn't. I don't have all the answers for everything in this world, but I do know one thing strong and true. Whatever was in the woods with us that night was a thinking creature. I have respect for it, and I do not live in fear of it. I still carry the exact same gun I've carried in those woods all my life. I just swivel my head a lot more when I'm out there, and I listen harder to the unexpected silences, more so than I do with sounds. Me and Trey have modified our call whistle, something harder to mimic, and we've agreed on what to do if we think something is trying to mimic us. When I clean a deer now, I don't drag long and never at night. I pick good ground. I pack up tidy. And when I leave a gut pile, I make sure I leave it clean, like a gift to nature. Every once in a while I'm out there working in my shed with the radio on low, and my old dog is snoring by the door, I think about the small rocks that were sure to miss us deliberately. I think about the steps that were in no hurry, and how something did a really good job of mimicking our whistle on the very first try. Some nights I dream I'm out there on the 2-track again that day, and I'm getting rocks thrown behind me. I swear to you, in that dream, I can hear a deep, gravelly voice telling me, "Leave, leave, leave." It chants to me until I finally wake up, wondering if I actually heard it that day, and I've maybe forgotten it. I'm going to close this by saying, if you're ever standing over your tag and you're busy with your work and something circles just beyond the edge of your sight, you do your work right. Keep your voice low. You be thankful and make sure you say thanks. Be respectful and be quick. And always leave a gift nice and neat. Then you leave quickly, the way the woods and your watcher have already asked you to do. Some messages come in words, and some come in silence and rocks being thrown that you can't see. If you ever do find yourself quartering out at last light, and the timber answers your whistle just a little bit wrong, mind the boundaries, pack up tidy, and leave what you must like a gift. And when the woods or something tells you to go, to leave, you listen up. Take what you can in your pack. Leave the rest. Thank you, my Sasquatch, for riding along with me tonight into Sasquatch Valley. It's always better with your company, and I really liked tonight's ride. I hope you do too. Listen up. Until the next time, please always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence, and you best mind the messages you get from the woods. Thanks for listening.